Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second National Rent Strike 2020 organizing meeting. My name is Rebecca. I am a renter in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm a volunteer organizer with Rent Strike 2020. I'm going to be your MC for this event today. We have a really incredible panel of speakers that we'll be hearing from, including prominent activists, socialists, and renters organizing in their buildings across the country. I will be introducing all of them in just a second. But for now, I really want to encourage everyone who is listening today to please sign in using the sign in sheet that should be popping up on this screen. We are trying to build the most powerful national movement that we can to demand a cancellation of all rent, mortgage, and utility payments for the duration of the coronavirus crisis. But to do this, we have to organize en masse across the country by connecting with people in our buildings and in our neighborhoods. And so to do that, we need to be able to follow up again with everyone on this call, connect you to other tenants in your area who are organizing, and really get you plugged in. So please, please, please sign in with the sign in sheet here. I will reference it a couple more times throughout the call. So for the format of this organizing meeting today, we are going to be hearing from each of our speakers for the first hour or so, and then we are going to be having a question and answer section. So there is a thread on the Facebook event page where you can ask any question that you might have. And we have organizers who are going to send those questions to me so that I can then ask them of our panelists later on. So if you have a question for a specific speaker or just in general about this movement, about how you can start organizing in your building, if you've started and something has come up and you don't know how to deal with it, anything like that, please, please, please post it in the Facebook thread and we'll make sure that it gets answered by one of our speakers later on. And finally, before I introduce our speakers, this is an organizing meeting, right? We're not just here to talk about the rent strike movement because it's fun. We're here really to build this movement and to discuss concrete next steps coming out of today. So everyone who is watching should right now go to the link, again, that should be popping up on their screen to join the Rent Strike Facebook group in your area if you haven't already. Facebook groups have popped up in cities from San Francisco and Oakland to Chicago to Boston to Gainesville, Florida, where renters are really using them as an active space to meet other tenants in their city and really start the process of organizing. So again, anyone who isn't already in their local Facebook group, please go and join it right now. And then everyone should take, again, just like a few minutes right now to invite 10 people to that Facebook group. Because again, we really have a big task ahead of us. We need to keep building this movement. So we need to bring more and more people in. So again, please go join your Facebook group, invite 10 people right now. So now I'm going to introduce our incredible speakers. So first of all, we have Joshua Collins. So we're gonna kick it over to Joshua Collins to wave hello to everyone. Just give us 1 second. Awesome. So Joshua Collins is a 26-year-old socialist truck driver running for US Congress. Hi, Joshua. Cool. So next we have Eva. Eva is a Boston renter who is organizing in her building. So we're going to be hearing about that later on. Hi, Eva. Next we have Tuli. Tuli is a Minneapolis renter organizing in their building. So we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. Hi, Tuli. And next we have Boots Riley, who is a filmmaker, screenwriter, activist, most recently known for having written and directed Sorry to Bother You, one of my personal favorite films. So thanks so much for being here, Boots. Awesome. And next we have Shama Sawant, Socialist Alternative Seattle City Council member. Thanks so much for being here, Shama. And finally, we have Rob Rook, Bay Area Rent Strike organizer. Thanks so much for being here, Rob. Great. So that's our list of speakers. We'll be hearing from them all very shortly. But just to kind of kick us off, I mean, obviously people know that we're in the midst of a historic crisis, right? The likes of which none of us have ever seen before. not only with the global health pandemic, but also the complete economic meltdown that it has triggered. And I think in this era of shelter in place orders, it can be really easy for folks to feel really isolated and alone in general, as the world around us are really coming crashing down. And when it comes to the question of rent, which for the vast majority of people in this country is a burden in the best of times, millions and millions of people are facing the terrifying prospects of missing payments on their own and falling behind. The federal moratorium on evictions and steps that different states across the country have taken to bolster these protections help people for now. So, in theory, right now, people can't be evicted in most places for missing rent payments. But that doesn't mean that landlords aren't trying to evict people illegally. It doesn't mean that landlords aren't harassing people to fork over their stimulus checks or any other money that they have. And it doesn't mean that people are guaranteed a roof over their heads when these eviction moratoriums are eventually lifted. And they do not take away the terror that so many people are experiencing right now as May 1st approaches and as June 1st approaches shortly after that. So, what this movement is about, what Rent Strike 2020 is about, is uniting renters in the same building, under the same landlords, in the same neighborhoods to make sure that no one has to miss a payment alone and face their landlord alone. And historically, tenant organizing has led to huge victories in defeating things like rent hikes and evictions. And rent strikes are an extremely powerful tool in this process. And some of our speakers are going to go into that a little bit more, which will be really helpful. But I think the key for a rent strike to be effective, for tenant organizing to be effective, to win rent reductions, to defeat evictions, is mass organization of renters across the country. And so the goal of this call today is to discuss, a little bit more in depth what the situation is that we're facing, what this movement is about, and how we can collectively begin this process of building a mass movement in this country that can actually create the pressure from below to cancel rent, cancel mortgage payments, and cancel utility payments during this crisis. So, with that being said, we're going to kick it over to our first speaker, Joshua Collins, who's going to start us off today. So, go ahead, Joshua.
Hey, how's it going? So my first job that I ever had when I was 15 years old was I worked in a grocery store. I bagged groceries and pushed carts, and I made $7.25 an hour. I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. I knew that this job was necessary then, like, and I understood that, like, if I didn't do this, someone else would have to do it because people, frankly, need help. You know, the shelves have to be stocked. Our grocery stores have to be mopped. Someone's got to collect the carts and someone's got to bag groceries, right? And after that, I've done various other jobs, customer service. I worked at a factory line, and I've also been a truck driver for the last 5 years. I've always known that me doing these jobs, I knew I was essential, and I was just never treated like it. And I think it's disgraceful that it takes a pandemic crisis for workers to actually be treated like they're essential, and to be viewed as they're essential. This capitalist system has gaslighted the working class for so long, teaching us that if you are a low wage worker, it's because you're not important, and it's because the value that you bring to our society isn't as much as someone who's very rich. And that's fundamentally untrue. I think we're seeing that play out today. And I think it's time that we assert that all workers are essential. That whether or not whether you're still working or whether you're laid off, we do need to keep this attitude about low wage workers, about people who stock shelves at grocery stores or work the fast food drive through. That those workers are important, that they matter, that they deserve a living wage, and that they deserve a union. And so I think this is, something that we need to use, and we need to keep on carrying this momentum for the working class, and not lose sight of how valuable all of us are after this crisis. The Rent Strike 2020 movement, I think, is something that reflects things that have happened throughout history. When when we built this Rent Strike 2020 organization, it's not because rent strikes weren't going to happen. It's to build a nationwide cohesive movement. Because if in other countries, this kind of naturally happens because geographically, everyone's really close. But in the United States, we're all really far. And we don't have the same sense of community as other countries do. In France, for example, the Yellow Vest movement was successful very easily because everyone was so close to each other. To drive across the country, it takes maybe a couple hours, whereas here it takes you a couple days. And so I think it's really important that we remember that the struggles that we are facing are the same across the country. That the same struggles that a fast food cashier is facing are the same struggles that a nurse is facing. And we do need to stand together and remember that we have the same problems. 95% of the people in this country are never going to own a business or employ workers, and about 5% will. So we need to remember that 95% of us are workers. We are the working class, and so if we're not making sure that our interests are taken care of, then what even is the point of having this government? I think it's a disgrace that our government, the only thing that it did was give $1,200 to some people. A lot of people still haven't gotten their $1,200. And if you are married to an immigrant who doesn't have a social security number, you just flat out don't get it, even if you would otherwise qualify for it. If you're a student, you don't get it, and if you're undocumented, you definitely don't get it. And so I think it's a disgrace that so many people have been left out of this very small check that has been cut to us. $1,200 isn't going to fix anything for anybody. It's, if anything, it's going to put us by for a couple weeks. And I think it's really important that we organize and that we stand up and unite against the capitalist class that is trying to use this to do what they did in 2008. They're trying to consolidate wealth and further widen the gap between the poor and the rich. So anyways.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua. Super helpful hearing from you a little bit. Yeah, and I think the point that you were making at the end there was really important. We've seen this before. We saw in 2008 when big business was bailed out and it was working class people that were left behind. And we need to fight to make sure that that doesn't happen again, that millions of people don't have to go into rental debt and face eviction a couple months from now. So we're going to hand it over to Thule now. Thule is a Minneapolis renter who has been organizing. So we're really excited to hear a little bit about how that's been going. So we'll kick it over to Thule in just 1 second. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Thule. She, they pronouns, please. I'm a student in Minneapolis. I rent from it's Mint Properties. They're one of the largest landlords in Minneapolis area. They own something like I believe it's 78 buildings. And so my neighbors and I have been organizing around rent forgiveness. And we're not currently striking, but with how big Mint is, we're just going to have to. There's no way they're going to give in to our demands otherwise. But all of this got kicked off about a month ago. I just wrote a letter introducing myself and talking about organizing and posted it on all of my neighbors' doors. And then within a couple days got responses of people being supportive from about half my building, which my building's only 8 units, so that's 5 people. But it was that was a start. And so from there, one of my neighbors, Dana, got into contact with the Minneapolis chapter of Socialist Alternative, and they helped us give us resources and get us connected with some folks from other Mint buildings. And then we just kind of got it rolling from there. We started a private Facebook group. We made a anonymous email. We came up with the name Mint Renters United. I have some graphic design experience, so I put together a flyer and we got it translated into it's in 3 languages now: English, Spanish, and Somali. And we collectively, I think we've hit every Mint building, like all 80 odd buildings, and just have been flyering and pushing really hard on recruiting folks. And so like doing whatever we can, like those city-wide like rent strike Facebook groups are really great because they allow people, they have a big platform so they can get a lot of people in the city to join, but then you can then recruit from those groups into smaller and get organized like according to each of your own landlords. And so we've just been pushing really hard. Have gotten, we're still pretty small. It's like maybe 20 people or so, and we have like weekly Zoom calls for strategy meetings. But right now we just finished drafting a letter to give to Mint that has all of our demands, and we're aiming to get around 100 signatures from Mint renters before we give it to them. We're also for gathering signatures for that, we're using a Google form, and that's also a way for us to gather additional information. So it's like you would read the letter and then sign your name at the bottom, but then you'd also give us like contact info and how willing you are to like jump in and help out with this stuff. So it just gives us further tools for really pushing this and getting the rent forgiveness that we need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. It's really, really inspiring to hear the work that you've been doing in your building. We would love to hear from folks who are listening into the call today, how this has been impacting everybody's ability to pay rent. So on our Facebook event page, there is a poll that's up right now that asks basically, will you be able to pay rent in May? So if everyone wants to go there and fill it out, that would be great. And then also just a reminder, if you have any questions that come up that you want to ask any of our incredible speakers, there's a thread also on the Facebook event page where you can post your question, and then we'll bring those into the question and answer section that's later on. Great. So we're gonna kick it over to Eva. Eva is a renter in Boston, also organizing in her building. So take us away, Eva.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. I'm Eva, and I'm a tenant in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is in the Boston area. I've been organizing in my building for a few weeks now, and currently, everyone in our building who has lost income due to the coronavirus crisis has won a rent reduction. So that's good news. However, our organizing efforts continue as we're now demanding no back payment of rent once the crisis is over. So I'm going to share how my building got to this point, as well as some key lessons for other people organizing in their buildings across the country. So the very first thing I had to do was reach out and get people's contact information. So my building has 7 units and over 20 tenants. I'd only ever talked to one person in the building before, excluding my roommates. So it really felt like I was starting from scratch in regards to reaching out. So to reach out, I knocked on doors and left handwritten notes for those that didn't answer. And while doing this, I wore PPE and made sure to keep a safe social distance. So through reaching out, I learned that many tenants in my building were unable to make full rent, and that one person had already won a rent reduction on an individual level. So further, I ran into a few folks who were so down with both the rent strike movement and organizing in our building. So from there, we held our first tenants meeting. So we had 15 tenants from 5 units attend a Zoom call. And at the meeting, I made sure to talk about the larger political and economic situation the country's facing. I also did some research on our landlord to share in the meeting to let folks know we should be bold in our demands. So our landlord pretends he's just some small landlord, but with a little digging, I actually found that he purchased our building in 1975 for $106,000. So collectively, our building pays more than double this amount in rent every year. And currently, He owns millions of dollars in real estate throughout the greater Boston area. So in our initial meeting, I put forward the idea of demanding a 50% rent reduction for the whole building. We were definitely not all on the same page, and there was pushback from people in the building. I think this pushback especially came from those who had not lost any income. However, a core group of tenants representing 3 units believed this was the best course of action, and ultimately, the group agreed it couldn't hurt to ask the landlord. So I would say after our first meeting, this was when the real legwork began. I think very, very unsurprisingly, our landlord said he would not grant the full building a 50% rent reduction, but that he needed tenants to reach out individually to share our current situations. He went on about his taxes and how he needs to know exactly how much of a hit he can expect as he's banking on being reimbursed for his losses. These losses are purely profit, as his expenses are easily covered by what we pay in rent. So, like other landlords and businesses, he expects to be bailed out, which is a trend we continue to see, while working class people and renters are crippled by economic crises. So we held another tenants meeting after hearing back from our landlord to establish next steps. And unfortunately, his approach of dealing with people on an individual basis really dampened the mood for a united approach to rent reduction. However, given that some tenants are fearful of retaliation in these uncertain times and others haven't been financially affected yet, this mood is understandable. And it's something that people organizing in their buildings should prepare for. So each unit agreed to call the landlord to request rent reductions and advocate for no back pay. So we all won those rent reductions. And then we immediately reported back via our building Facebook page, as we wanted to guarantee that the landlord wasn't saying different things to different units. And so even though we had to reach out individually to win our rent reductions, we're still fighting as a collective. We have a team prepared to draft a letter clarifying our demand around no back payment of rent and no landlord debt, which will be a key battle for us in the coming months. So I guess some final thoughts or lessons from this process is that the only way to learn if people are willing to organize in your building is by speaking with your fellow tenants. So as tenants and workers, we have power when we are united. We need to learn what people are ready to fight for. And we need to be open and willing to organize around things like rent reductions and rent debt. This is what my building's doing. I wanted to add that a tenant I know is organizing for rent reduction in her building, and their demand even includes a demand for free laundry. So this shows that we need to join forces to fight for what we need now, as well as what we need after the pandemic. And then on a bit of a separate note, if our landlords can grant reductions now and still get by, we should fight to keep these reductions even after the crisis is over. So in my building, beyond winning rent reductions for those who need it, we've established key channels of communication so that we can continue our organizing. We don't know what the next months or years will, or the next year will hold for us. But whatever the next battle is, whether it's fighting payment plans or retaliation, we won't be starting from scratch. So finally, I wanted to say that I stand in solidarity with fellow renters already immersed in this work, as well as those who are about to jump in. And I look forward to organizing together in the weeks and months ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eva, for sharing a little bit about the organizing you've been doing. It's really, really inspiring. And I think the note that you ended on there is so important, that, you know, we're not just fighting right now. I mean, we have to defend ourselves right now, but yeah, if our landlords are charging us 20, 40, 50% more than they actually need to maintain our buildings, to pay their taxes, we want to fight for those reductions now, but we don't want to give that up, right? We know that rents are so high in this country. and really setting up the connections right now with our neighbors is a really key part in that process. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have another poll question that we're putting up on our Facebook event page. Have you posted flyers or gotten in contact with your neighbors in some way while social distancing yet? So please, anyone who's listening, go check out the Facebook event page and respond to our poll. And just a reminder, again, we have our sign-in sheet. Please, please, please make sure you sign in so we can really, really get you plugged in. And also, please keep the questions coming on the Facebook event page thread. We'll get to them later in our program. Great. So I am going to kick it over now to Boots Riley. Take it away, Boots.
Whoa. Okay. So I have to follow that very inspiring and well-organized talk by Eva. And I'm probably the least qualified to be here on this panel because I am not involved in a rent strike. And so I guess I'm just here cheerleading what's going on and the inspirational stories that I've just heard here and what I'm seeing happening around the country. And we're really, through, in school, we hear about all these sorts of time periods that are supposedly were very radical and full of movement, like the 60s. And then, you may dig a little deeper and hear about the 20s and 30s. But really right now, we're in a period that we will look back on and see as being a qualitative change in political movement. And there are so many things that are obvious about that, and in not just radical thought, but in and the growth of that, but in people figuring out ways to be organized and ways to connect and ways to actually confront what's happening. And the COVID crisis has just put a magnifying glass on all of these problems for folks. And so we are obviously, many folks know about this strike wave that's happening across the country, and people organizing not only in their own interests, which is very important, but there's a class consciousness happening that's making people fight for each other. You see it in things like the GE workers that were building engines, who struck, and one of their demands was that they should be able to build ventilators. Right? That's not something that we learn about, but normally happening. You see people understanding that we are going to have to fight for this, and that fight is not going to just come from leaders with the right ideas. It's going to happen with us organizing. And these two stories that we just heard are examples of that, and that's happening all over the place. But not only are they examples, but by them happening, what Tuli and Eva shared, by what they are doing, they are actually inspiring more people to do the same. And so not just growing by example, but that is part of the organizing that it's taking. And we can't leave these things to be, just anecdotal things that happen and we cheer them on, which is why the Rent Strike 2020 organization is so important. I think we're coming out of a time in which a lot of folks, even folks that consider themselves radical, were very anti-organization, very anti party, very anti anything that seemed quote unquote big, because the idea is the concept is that then it loses some sense of grassroots authenticity and reality. But the way I see this rent strike rolling out, it seems to be the perfect mix of, you know, the action that's taken locally and even, you know, hyper locally, and but connecting it with what's going on. Because what's going to happen is this: look, once, you know, once they stop the moratorium on evictions, everybody's going to owe a whole bunch of rent, and the individual fights are not going to work. And only what organization we've built during that time is going to fight against it. And especially in areas that have been deemed ripe for gentrification, right? All of a sudden, you're going to have, you know, whole neighborhoods that are 6 months behind on rent. And what's happening right now? Look, the tech industry is not slowed down because they all work from home. A lot of industries are not slowed down. Only certain aspects of the working class are slowing down. So it's, without organization, it makes things right for whole areas of folks to be moved out and to be affected by gentrification, and able and willing and able to do to have massively terrible things done to them. So only our organization is going to help us, and I just commend everybody who's being part of this. What's also going to be necessary is that more radical labor movement to go on with it, because once we come out of this, if we're not organized, there are going to be people willing to work for whatever's offered, because we're going to be desperate. And so we need organization in, and thanks for doing this, and let me know how I can help.
Great. Thank you so much, Boots. Yeah, that was really, really incredible. I think the point that you make about the need to really, really be organized right now is just so, so crucial. I mean, I think just hearing from Tuli and Eva gives a little bit of an example of how complicated and challenging this work is. And there are so many lessons that, you know, tenants are learning across the country, and we can really share those lessons and work together to fight collectively as much as possible through the Rent Strike 2020 movement. And I think the point you make about gentrification is so important as well. I mean, housing, which is not negotiably a human right, something that every single person needs, we need shelter, is driven by a for-profit system, right? And so crises like this are used as opportunities for a small group of people to make a lot of profit. And so the risk of that coming is so huge. So we need to make sure that no one loses their home, no one goes into rental debt because of this crisis. So thank you so much for raising that really important point. So next we're gonna kick it over to Shama Sawant, Socialist Alternative Seattle City Council member. Take us away, Shama.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to Rent Strike 2020 for this nationwide organizing meeting. And thanks especially to Eva and Tuli, who shared very important accounts of how they're, you know, organizing on the ground. And so much gratitude to Boots Riley for being here. That solidarity is incredibly important. Globally, 200,000 people have been confirmed dead from COVID-19, including 52,000 from the US. And we know that's an underestimate because people have died at home without being tested all around the world. And over 26 million American workers have officially become unemployed in the last 5 weeks. This is absolutely stunning. It has already reached depression kind of situation. And 1/3 of renters could not afford to pay their rent in the first week of April, and now May 1st is just 6 days away. And yet billionaires are getting richer, 10% richer, in fact, in the last 5 weeks. It is just incredible to see the nature of this capitalist system, that at the time when we are facing the most enormous crisis of our lives, these guys at the top are getting so much richer. That's actually over 300 billion more in the pockets of the richest, and that money came from our pockets and our needs being underfunded. And we know, as Boots was saying, more and more people are understanding that this system isn't caring for us. It's actually making a few bucks off our tragedies. And it is in this context that 3 million people have signed the Rent Strike 2020 petition that was initiated by Joshua Collins, who you just heard from, and other renters' rights activists. And now tenants around the country are beginning to get organized. And of course, we should not have any idea that winning concrete demands like rent suspension, that is, canceling of rent payments, mortgage payments, utility payments without any adverse consequences, that it will be easy to win this, or that we will defeat corporate landlords with a single blow on May 1st. A building for a rent strike, whether it is in a single building or through a broader movement, will require serious organizing. You've already heard from tenants who are doing that kind of work, and we know this will be a longer fight. And yet, this is a moment for working people to step up on our organizing and to begin our fight for a different kind of society. Because millions of people are recognizing, young people, working people, that this system is not working for us. Frontline workers are starting to show a way forward with their courageous protests and walkouts to protect the health of our communities. We've seen Amazon warehouse workers, nurses, sanitation workers, so many workers speaking out, walking out of their jobs to make a point, and we've seen the solidarity towards them from our community. And to sort of to bring all this kind of struggle and the discussion of the organizing together, Socialist Alternative has launched an effort called Workers Speak Out on Facebook. So I hope the organizers of this event will share the link to that Facebook group out right now so that you all can join it, because this is a Facebook group where workers who are facing unsafe conditions are reporting how they are getting organized in the workplace. This includes workers who are being asked to sacrifice themselves in the crisis while being denied protective equipment, safe working conditions, and hazard pay. And I could not agree more with a point that Boots made, which is that there is a dire need for the labor movement to show leadership. We need militant workplace organizing. And if the union leaderships are not going to lead this, then these have to be led by rank and file leadership. But we will need organizing in the workplace, absolutely. And that has to go hand in hand with renter organizing. In Seattle and Washington State, my office, with the solidarity of many community organizations, we launched a petition demanding that the Governor Inslee of the state of Washington, immediately suspend, meaning cancel, the rent, mortgage, and utility payments throughout the state. And within a few days, we had over 9,000 people sign this petition. And there is enormous solidarity around this demand. And it's a reminder of how much power we can have if we organize collectively. One individual, whether it's a worker or a renter or even a homeowner, can easily be targeted. One individual refusing to pay rent or saying you can't pay rent, that's not a rent strike, and you are easily susceptible to eviction or foreclosure. Our strength lies in collective action. It is the concrete examples like Eva and Julie organizing their buildings. That is what matters. So those of you who are watching and you want to get organized because you can't pay rent anyway, you're going to be in crisis. As Booth said, once the eviction moratoriums are lifted, they will come after us. Absolutely. Let's not forget what happened in the Great Recession in 2008. In the wake of that Great Recession, there were nearly 10 million foreclosures around the nation. And what happened was, when the homeowners, the middle class and working class homeowners, were unable to pay their mortgage payments every month, the big banks came after them. And that loss of homeownership, it has never recovered since then. And so it's also a reminder of how winning reforms under capitalism will not be enough. We will need a fundamental shift to a socialist society. But we need to build the building blocks. And right now is a crucial moment with tenants organizing throughout the nation to organize in your building as well. So if you haven't started organizing yet, I would really urge you to take the concrete suggestions from Eva and Tuli, contact your fellow tenants, slip a note under their door saying, hey, this is my contact information. If you're not able to pay your rent, will you get organized with me? Can we have a Zoom meeting? Can we discuss what demands we should put forward? And we should understand that when we call for a rent strike on May 1st, that doesn't mean it's an all or nothing kind of demand. What we're saying is let's all of us tenants who are in separate buildings, in separate cities, in separate states, let's all have a coordinated day of action. And it in your building, it may be that your fellow tenants, a majority of them will agree to a full rent suspension being demanded from the landlord. Maybe they will agree to partial demands. Eva laid out a really good concrete example of how you should have that discussion with your fellow tenants and see what you can get a majority agreement on. And even if it's a partial demand, like a 25% reduction in rent, this can be a huge victory. What is key is to win the strongest possible demands that we can get our fellow tenants to fight for together, not individually. And so we don't believe that our fight, our demand to cancel or suspend rent, mortgage, and utility payments is going to result in an immediate victory on May 1st, because this is the kind of demand that provokes an immediate clash between renters and workers and the capitalist class, the property owning classes. And so we are going up against extremely powerful, ruthless, and blood-sucking entities in the among the capitalists. And so we should not imagine that it's going to be easy. So let's look at May 1st as the kind of sort of a day to begin laying the basis for an ongoing organizing. And for those of you who are looking for more concrete guidance of how you should do it, I would really urge you to look at the FAQ, the frequently asked questions that my office has put together. But this is not Seattle specific. This is useful, hopefully, for renters throughout the nation. So it doesn't matter where you live. If you're watching this right now, make sure you seek help from that FAQ and see how renters are organizing throughout the nation. It contains the kind of guidance that tenants have themselves put together. Share it with your fellow tenants, share it with your family and friends. And to add to what Eva and Tuli were saying, here in an hour and a half, actually, we're going to have a Seattle area organizing meeting for the May 1st rent strike. And one of the people who's going to speak is a representative of a tenants' rights struggle right here in Capitol Hill, which is part of our district here in Seattle, in what's called the Ben Lamont building, which is owned by a rich family and managed by a company called Cornell and Associates. Cornell is one of the biggest residential property owners in the city and in this area, in the Seattle region. They own 5,500 residential apartments. And this organizing is such a brilliant example of how you can do this with your fellow tenants. They have organized 37 of the 40 apartments together, who have together signed onto the demands, and they're demanding that the landlord suspend and cancel rents without consequences. And also they are demanding a 50% reduction in rent, like we heard from the example in Boston. And if you know anything about Seattle, you know that will be a reasonable demand because we have sky high rents. So I think part of this building the movement is to organize in your own building. The other part also is to stand with renters who are organizing in their own buildings, even if it's not your building. Because, and this is the bottom line, it's a fundamental understanding of movements, is that if other renters win victories, it will be a boost for our movement for renters' rights overall, and a step forward to win the cancellation of rents and mortgage payments entirely throughout the nation. It will really have a feeling of empowerment for renters throughout the nation if any of us can win victories. And importantly, any of these concrete victories will send a message to the landlords, to the rapacious property management corporations, that we are not just going to take this lying down. We are not going to pay for this crisis. We can't pay. We won't pay. You all who have massive cash reserves, you who have exploited renters and workers for decades, you who are profiteering off this pandemic again, you have to pay for this crisis, not renters and working people. And so concrete victories will matter for our movement. And to discuss that even further, if you're in the Seattle area, I really welcome you to join the Seattle Rent Strike 2020 Facebook group. I think the organizers will share the link to that. I really welcome you. If you're anywhere in the Washington State area, or even not in Washington State, but you want to join a group of renters, you're welcome to join this Facebook group. we're not going to return to normal because the normal under capitalism never worked for us. Normal under capitalism before this pandemic meant sky high rents in cities around the country, 40% of people in the richest country in the history of humanity being unable to afford an unexpected $400 expense, over $1.6 trillion in student debt, and a capitalist class and system that is unable to address the climate catastrophe and is hell-bent on protecting their profits even as we are heading over the cliff on the climate disaster. If the billionaires rule society without being challenged by mass movements and militant resistance, we will see major cuts to social programs alongside Great Depression level unemployment. We have to learn lessons from this pandemic. Who is essential and who's not in this crisis? As Joshua mentioned, it is clearly ordinary workers who are essential, not the bosses. When workers go home and are told to stay home because of social distancing, the economy comes to a grinding halt. The bosses are not doing the work, the workers are doing the work. And we see how the billionaires and the politicians are not on our side. We have to draw clear conclusions not only about the crisis, but about the capitalist system itself, because you see, Marx was right. It is the working class that creates value in this economy while the bosses take the lion's share for themselves. So, working people need to get organized as we are beginning to do. The bosses system cannot run without us, and we have that power to change things. As renters, we should get organized with clear demands, as we've just heard, and with determination for rent relief and to resist evictions. And we have to remember that at the end of the day, if we don't get organized as renters, the evictions are going to happen. So the only way of fighting against evictions is to get organized. And this is also a very important response to tenants who will genuinely be afraid to get organized and will legitimately ask you when you talk to them about getting organized. They may say, "But aren't we going to get evicted if we start getting organized? Isn't it dangerous?" And absolutely, they are right in the sense that we have to take organizing seriously and not underestimate the power and the ruthlessness of the corporate landlords. But at the same time, if we don't get organized, evictions will inevitably have it happen in massive waves. So we have to fight against that, and we have to fight for rent control and for a massive expansion of publicly owned social housing as an alternative to this for-profit housing market, which clearly does not work because it does not build for housing to be affordable and to eliminate homelessness. It builds to maximize profits. We are seeing this in cities around the country. And that is why in Seattle, alongside the rent strike, organizing for May 1st, we are also building the fight to tax Amazon and big business. And it will absolutely be a fight because the politicians in this city, just like many other cities, are controlled by big business. Just to give you an example, Amazon's mayor, I call her Amazon's mayor, she's Seattle's mayor, but she's Amazon's mayor. She's a Democrat, Jenny Durkin. She's pulling out all the stops to help them. And she said, there's no way that I'm going to allow an Amazon tax to happen. And the city council is 8 Democrats and 1 socialist, which is me. And yet we are going to have to fight. And we saw, of course, what the Democratic leadership did to Bernie Sanders' campaign and our movement. So repeatedly, these examples are showing to us why working people cannot rely on the Democratic Party and the establishment, and we need our own party, independent of corporate money and corporate power. And so, we are building an independent movement to win the Amazon tax in Seattle, which would tax the largest corporations, the most profitable corporations, to immediately fund $200 million worth of relief, cash assistance for 100,000 working families who have lost their jobs and their incomes. And then starting next year, the tax would raise $500 million for social housing and Green New Deal expansion. And who's fighting against us? It's the Democratic establishment. It's the same billionaires who, along with Trump, are attempting to force workers back unsafely to work so that they can make profits, threatening a second and potentially worse wave of infections and deaths from coronavirus. Amazon is one of the corporations that will be taxed. And look at what Amazon has done. Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, increased his wealth by 24 billion during this pandemic, at the same time not providing his workers even the basic protections. And then on top of that, firing warehouse workers who are organizing, firing tech workers who stood with the warehouse workers, which is an example of the classic divide and conquer strategy that the capitalists use against us. That is why We not only have to fight on our immediate demands right now, we also need to fight to take corporations like Amazon into democratic public ownership, because what they are doing is putting their profits over human lives. And we need to take these corporations into democratic ownership of workers and community to run them in the interest of human needs, not profits. We need to do the same with the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries and the hospitals, which, in spite of the tremendous courage of healthcare workers, these hospitals are putting their profits ahead of human health and lives. And not just in this crisis, they always have done that. And immediately, we need to fight to win Medicare for all. We need to take the big development, property development corporations, the big landowners, and the big banks also into democratic public ownership, because we're going to need public ownership of housing, not corporate landowners leeching off struggling renters. You know, every aspect of this system, every aspect of this pandemic shows that capitalism doesn't work for us. It was never built for us. We need to fight for a different kind of society, a socialist society where we, the majority of workers, we own and democratically control the big companies, where the economy is planned on a sane, sustainable, humane, and democratic basis, where our lives and needs come first. A world where there are no billionaires, there is no Wall Street, and there are no corporate landlords, no exploiters, period. Imagine that kind of world. Let's get organized and let's take our fight to May 1st and beyond. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Shama. Super inspiring. Yeah, everything that you're talking about and hearing about the work that you all have been doing in Seattle and Washington. Yeah, we've got a lot that we need to fight for. Thank you so much for that. We have another poll that we're going to put up on our Facebook event page, asking if you rent from one of the top wealthiest corporate landlords, because like Shama was saying, there are these corporations that own thousands, tens of thousands of units that make billions and billions of dollars in profit every single year. That's profit that's going into the pockets of these wealthy CEOs directly out of the hands of renters who are extremely cost burdened. And we want to know if you rent from one of these wealthy corporate landlords. So again, we can try to start the process of organizing in these buildings and fighting back, like our awesome speakers have been talking about. So we're going to kick it over to our last speaker, Rob, who is a Bay Area rent strike organizer, and then we'll be going to the question and answer section. So if you have any questions, make sure to also post those in the Facebook event thread, and we'll answer them shortly. But for now, go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to Eva and to Tuli and to the hundreds and possibly thousands of Evas and Tulis around the country that are attempting to shape the direction of this catastrophe that has been brought down on us by really the mismanagement of this society. I'm a union carpenter. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, but I've also been organizing with the Campaign for Renters' Rights since 1999. We actually have never organized a rent strike, but mostly we fought against slumlords attempting to evict families and elders in order to get around Oakland's rent control laws. We also had a huge victory in the city of Alameda, helping 238 families to keep their Section 8 vouchers. And we won those victories through direct action campaigns, including picketing landlords' homes, sometimes their churches, occupying politicians' offices, and every eviction that we defeated, we saw as homeless prevention. This pandemic in the US is not going to be over in a month or two. COVID-19 testing is at about a quarter of the rate that is necessary to contain the virus, and contact tracing to prevent a second wave and also to contain the virus is completely, almost entirely non-existent. So this is the terrain that we're working in. 26 to anywhere up to 35 million people currently unemployed, and upwards of 25 million people who will lose their employer-based health insurance. Millions are now going to food banks for the first time in their entire lives. Even before the crisis, as different speakers have pointed out, things weren't, the previous normal was not that good, 1 in 4 renters pay more than half of their incomes in rent. It's almost feudal, like the peasant would have to give the landlord a certain amount every month. 44% of Americans make less than $18,000 per year. People have no reserves. Last month, as we heard, 6 million people could not pay the rent and did not pay the rent amongst apartment building renters. And they obviously are the beginning. They are unlikely to be able to pay rent half of their incomes in rent. At Rent Strike 2020, we're fighting for a freeze on rent payments with no accrued debt. And the way to get there is through, as everybody's mentioned, is through organizing. Many people currently feel that things are out of control and that when things settle down, maybe then they can begin to engage in this new world situation. However, the big landlords are not sitting on their hands right now. They are busy. They are organizing. Their goal is obvious. They want as much money as possible. They are meeting. They're putting out memoranda. They're sending to each other. They're sending payment plans to their renters that will bury tenants in debt for years to come. In their internal memos, they remind fellow landlords not to go too strong and to show empathy when they're extracting this money from people who are possibly unable to afford groceries in 3 weeks or a month's time. They're encouraging tenants to pay by using their credit cards. Most young people's credit cards interest rate is 23% or above. And they're also leaning, of course, on their friends in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. So what can we do? People are feeling isolated. They're feeling quite shell-shocked, but we can fight back and we can do small things now, which will help gain some control over this evolving situation for us all. We need to know what our rights are, which will differ from state to state. Where the unions and the working class have been more organized historically, then renters tend to have more protections. Some post-corona protections are now in place and has been added, such as the eviction memorandum moratoriums. These moratoriums give us time to organize, but they don't override the landlord's legal right to his rent. We need to connect with thousands on the Rent Strike 2020 Facebook groups that are all over the country now. Tenants are all on those lists. Tenants are already familiar with the laws, but if all the tenant lawyers in the entire world came to Oakland, California, there would not be enough tenant lawyers to serve the needs of tenants looking for legal advice. Whether you can afford the rent in May or not, the key is to connect with your roommates, with your other tenants, and with your neighbors. The shelter in place is definitely an obstacle for us, as we've heard, but people would be more open, of course, in the future to face-to-face meetings, as has been the past when we've organized tenants. Use one of our flyers, use the posters, do your own flyers, your own posters, try to organize a Zoom meeting or a free conference call for your building. Organize a WhatsApp group for your building. Maybe 3 or 4 people will respond at first, and then we can start a private Facebook page for your building. Talk about people's situations. Can they pay none of their rent? Can they pay some of their rent? What is the general consensus? The more tenants that come to the meeting, the more confident the group will be. Figure out whether a full strike or rent reduction works best, and begin the process of sending a letter to your landlord. If you decide to pay part of the rent, be sure that those who have nothing to pay are included in your proposal. That June or Juliet or Julie or whatever, that they will only be paying $10 because they have nothing. We want everybody together. That is critical. The landlord's first response will likely to be harsh. They're used to getting their ways, like sport children, but they will have to weigh up whether they want something or whether they get nothing. Rent Strike 2020, we're against renters paying for the coronavirus crisis. We're opposed to payment plans and we're opposed to more debt for working class families already radically in debt. Some people will tell you that this approach is reckless and that you should just go into debt. But the streets of Oakland have many thousands of Oaklanders living in tents who were not reckless, but who were squeezed between high rents and low pay and unmanageable high debts. That's why at Rent Strike 2020, we say, do not move out. I'll say it again, do not move out. Whether you can pay part of your rent or all of your rent or none of your rent, stay in your home. Any 3-day notice to pay or quit, which is put on your door, is currently illegal in most states, but the landlords will do it anyway. This does not mean that you have to leave. This means that if you don't pay, they have the right to proceed into a court action, which basically means bringing you to court for an eviction case. None of that is currently going on. The courts will not begin to process any evictions through the summer, and come the end of the summer, they cannot evict everyone. Like a union, there's safety in numbers. And the more people organize today, the more people we will have for the mass protests, the eviction cases going on in court and outside of people's homes. We currently in the Bay Area have 2,300 people on our Facebook page and are working alongside other groups such as the Oakland Rent Strike Coalition, which is connected with, has the Oakland Teachers Unions affiliated, as is the Tenants Union, Democratic Socialist of America, and of course, Socialist Alternative. I want to end by saying something about fear, which is an issue that will definitely be one of the first things that we'll come across in organizing. The roofs over our heads are a critical part of our lives. The big landlord will manipulate this fear to squeeze everything that they can out of you. Tenants organized do have power. You'll be surprised at how many people want to connect with their neighbors during this process, and how many people are also in the same boat as you are. Finally, the big landlords, for all their whining about how they'll be missing money if the rent isn't paid, they're not going to be going to the food banks that many people on this phone call will be going to. Our advice, if you can't afford, if you haven't got enough money right now to pay for your food for the rest of the month or for the foreseeable future, don't pay your rent. The landlords have an army of lawyers and politicians batting for them, we know that. But their main reliance is on the tenants not being organized. But renters, we also have some things in our favor. Taking a tenant to court in California will cost the landlord about $10,000. It's a bit of a disincentive for them, given that they think of money all the time. Tenants also have somewhere around 4 months before any eviction takes place, at least in California. And there are always more renters than there are landlords. We want a future where working class people aren't just going to work to pay off debts and to add on rent debt to that debt. Another world is possible. Today's meeting is essentially about one thing, and that is about organizing. This is our only way forward. This is a battle that will stretch over months. This is just the beginning. And I want to thank everybody for having the courage to be on this call and the foresight to be a part of this movement.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, we're in this not for weeks, not for months, but possibly for years. So thank you again, everyone, for being on this call. Just a reminder for everyone to please sign in to our sign-in sheet that should be on the Facebook event description and in the comments section. We really want to make sure that we can plug everyone in. So please fill that out. So we're going to move into the question and answer section. Thank you everyone for posting such helpful questions on the Facebook thread. The first couple of questions we have that are in this kind of similar vein, we have Nikolai who said, over the past week, I've had to console multiple friends whose fellow renters were doing the landlord's work of hounding them to contribute more money. I'd like to hear some simple talking points for bringing fearful co-renters into more of a strength in numbers mindset when the very real anxiety over losing shelter is causing infighting or resentment among folks who are all in the same precarious position. And then we have Sarah Gold, who says, what is a good way to persuade other tenants in my building to participate in the rent strike if they can afford to pay their rent? So we're going to kick it over to Eva first, and then Tuli, who will try to answer these questions. Go ahead, Eva.
Hi, yeah, I think those are like such valid questions. And like, I want to start by saying like, this is hard and like, this is scary and this requires a ridiculous amount of bravery. And also that there's no magic thing to say. However, here's what I would advise based on something that really did work in my building at our first meeting. So when I was first trying to sell people on our initial demand of the building-wide 50% rent reduction, one tenant who really needed the greatest reduction, she came in and said to the group, she said, this works best when it's nameless and faceless. And I was like, whoa, like, oh my God, that is so powerful. And I feel like that's because it's not, right now, it's not our landlord's business to know who can and can't pay rent. And that can only lead to unfair treatment in the future. And I think if people can understand that, maybe they will be a little bit more on board. And I think the idea of someone who can't pay rent appealing to the group to say, this is the best way to protect me when we fight for this building-wide action, to protect me and other people who can't pay. So I guess that's my advice about that one.
Thank you so much, Eva. Tuli, do you want to take a crack at this question as well?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think a lot of it is like what Eva was saying, like making that personal connection and like talking with folks and like seeing where they're at and like how this has been affecting them and showing them how it's been affecting their neighbors, and just like really focusing on like building that empathy and like connections and just like talking and seeing how people are struggling. And then I think too, just like the way you frame the strike too is important. Like you shouldn't, it's kind of a hard sell if you go straight to people and are like, hey, are you ready to rent strike with me right this second? It's more of like, hey, we should get organized with the possibility that we will rent strike in the future. Like that is an option, but like you should focus on building like the committee and the tenants and getting yourselves organized and all on the same page first before approaching the landlord.
Great. Thank you so much, Eva and Tuli. That's super helpful. So we have another kind of pair of questions that are getting at the same thing that I will read out, and Rob will try to answer these. So we have Dante, who says, any tips on participating in the rent strike for those who are renting a home instead of an apartment? And then we have Ling, I believe, any tips on organizing several smaller units / houses for rent owned by a property manager would be great. So Rob, if you'd be able to try to answer these questions.
Yeah, I think it's with the starting with the property management companies. There are some big corporations in America, like Mid-America Apartment Community, which owns 100,000 units. So there's different ways of skinning a cat, or whatever they say, for the capitalist class to make money out of us. The other way of organizing is to organize a management company where sometimes it's different owners, but they all come under the same. The management company collects the money for you, so you don't have to. It's like, especially for investment companies and so on. But I think the main thing is with the management companies, and the biggest one in America, I can't remember the name of it, but they manage 500,000 units. So it's really a big enterprise. Treat them the same way as a landlord. For the management companies, try to deal directly with the management companies as if you would with a landlord, and they will have to do the running around and talking to the owners about whether whether they should accept this or not accept this. They might be more hard-nosed, but they also are in the business of probably taking a slice of the rent for their income. So if their income goes to zero for 1 month, that's not good for them. So it's an incentive to them to accept a lower rent. As for the those tenants that are living in single family homes, it depends. Sometimes those single family homes are also owned by bigger landlords. I don't know if we can have somebody go on the Facebook feed and put in some of the ways to find out who the owner is of your building and what other buildings they own. In some cities, it's easier and more transparent. In Oakland, you have to go to the bloody assessor's office, so it's a pain in the neck. But that's for multiple buildings. But in terms of an individual landlord, definitely approach them. We had a tenant here a couple of days ago tell us that she paid $800. She owed $2,000 for her house. Single mom with kids. They said fine. They took the money, but then they said we're still going to take court action against you. And she said, "Oh my God, I wish I hadn't paid them anything, because I really needed that $800. So I think you also, just finally, you are going to have some landlords that are going to be reasonable. And, we want to be reasonable with them, but we want to survive. And organization is our best step in that direction.
Great, thank you so much, Rob. So our next question is from Sasha Wu, who says, do you know if landlords can report late payments to credit agencies? So we're going to kick it over to Joshua Collins to try to answer this one. Go ahead, Joshua.
I don't know if there's anything on the federal level that does that. So I think that's something that's been passed on the federal level. So, and I'm sure they are anyway.
Great, thank you. Just going to look through another couple of questions that we have here. So we have another question. If you are in low income housing, will this rent strike affect your housing? I think that's a really, really important question. Rob, do you think that you could try to take that question on and responding a little bit about how we make sure that the rent strike is being used as a tool to really protect renters?
Yeah, are we talking about low public housing or non-public housing?
It's not clarified in the question, but maybe you could speak to both if you're able.
Yeah. I think it's the same process for any kind of housing. Is that nobody wants to get kicked off their housing for not paying rent. Millions are going to be facing eviction notices, and their only way of organizing is to try to get as many people together as you can and to make a reasonable demand. And when I say reasonable for us, not what they consider reasonable, because what they consider reasonable is that we go into a massive debt pit hole, basically, for years to come. So I think in non-profit housing and in public housing, I would say it should be the same approach, that try to organize some kind of a union or a council or a grouping of tenants and deal directly with your landlord or the non-profit board that runs the building.
Great, thank you, Rob. So someone else asked, how do I find out if my landlord is a wealthy corporate one? Eva, would you be able to help us out with this one and talk a little bit about how you conducted research on your landlord?
Yeah, for sure. So there are like a bunch of different databases out there where you can just like type in your landlord's name or like type in your property management owner's name or something like that. So I know a big one is like whatever town you're in, you can look at like the tax assessor's database. I think that's like the first place I would recommend looking. That's where you'll see like what your building is assessed at, and then you can even like search by owner to see if like any other buildings pop up. I'm trying to think of the names of some of the other websites off the top of my head. I do know that they have been posted, at least in the Boston Rent Strike Facebook group. So that's like a place to look back, maybe in other groups as well. And that like, as this rent strike movement, like we are a team, and like, if you can't find your landlord, like reach out to us, send the admins of your local group or the national group, like a private message. And like, we have so many volunteers that want to help you research your landlord, especially those that just like think this is the dopest movement ever, but like live in a house that someone they know owns, or like really do have that like rare breed of like one small landlord. So lots of resources, and reach out for help.
Great. Thank you so much, Eva. That's really helpful. So that's bringing us to the end of our question and answer section. So we are going to hand it over to Rob to sum us up. And after Rob is finished speaking, I'm just going to talk about a few concrete next steps. So please stick around for the end of that. But take it away, Rob.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for being on the call. And again, thank you for everybody in every building around the country that is attempting to overcome the current adversity, both the adversity in terms of the economic adversity, plus also the health adversity, the complications and the difficulties in organizing in shelter in place. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank especially Joshua and Boots and Ava and Tully for coming on the call. For the next steps, I think it's very important everybody on the call connects with their local Facebook pages. We are having weekly meetings of our Facebook group, Zoom meetings of our group rather, in the Bay Area. And I imagine many of the other Facebook groups are doing the same. This is not a fight that is going to be over in the next couple of weeks. What we are doing is we're sowing seeds and we're developing infrastructure so as when the bigger battles begin down the road, when they do start to ask for that back rent, when they do start to threaten us with eviction, that we're able to respond in a way, in an organized fashion and in mass. So we want these Facebook pages to be huge with tens of thousands of people on them. And so join them, link up with invite all tenants that you know, everybody, maybe not so much in my age group, but in the age group of most of the people here. Everybody knows friends, knows dozens and dozens of renters, and they need to connect up and be a part of this movement. And I think Shama's office has shown a way forward for what we should expect from politicians in this country. We want politicians to respond to our needs and not to constantly be having dinner and drinks or whatever they're doing virtually these days with the big corporate heads and the rich. We run this country. And that's clear now, as Joshua pointed out. We also are paying too much to the landlord class that, as Eva pointed out, have already paid their building years ago. And it's an extraction economy that we need to turn upside down. And part of that is taking those first few steps to organizing. So thank you for everybody for being on the call.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. And yeah, just wanted to echo the thank you to all of our awesome speakers today. So just concretely coming out of this meeting, Rob was just talking about it, but find and join your local Facebook group. So the link to kind of the compilation of all the different local Facebook pages should be in the Facebook event description as well as in the comment section. So look out for that. Join the Facebook group, connect with renters in your area, and invite people you know so we can continue building. And then please sign in using the petition sheet that we have. Again, should be in the Facebook event description as well as in the comments. We will be able to then follow up with you, tell you about our next organizing meetings, and really plug you in. So please do both of those things. And then finally, Rent Strike 2020 is a grassroots movement of renters across this country. And it's really crucial to be able to host these meetings, to pay for our Zoom subscription, to support full-time organizers, to run the website. We need resources, we need finances, and we have to fund ourselves from the grassroots, right? So there's a link to a donation page that people can find, again, in the Facebook event description. So please, if you're able to, $5, $10, $15, whatever you're able to donate to this movement so that we can continue building and make sure that no one is facing eviction, no one is going to fall behind in rent, and that we can collectively fight back. So please, if you're able, make a donation. And thank you so much, everyone, for being on the call today. We look forward to continue organizing in the months to come. All right, thank you.